Good morning and peace be upon you wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid, and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. My friends, thank you for tuning in. We got a great show today. Two robust conversations. One with Kahlil Greene. You may know him as the Gen Z historian. We have a conversation on Malcolm X and his 100th birthday. I've obviously long studied Malcolm X. We had Ibram Kendi on a few weeks ago to talk about his new book on Malcolm X, but I wanted to talk again about him on his 100th birthday, the legacy he leaves. And that conversation is going to be broken up into two parts. It's going to be in this introduction, and then we're going to bring on our second guest, an amazing, amazing leader, Portia Allen Kyle, who some of you may know as the executive director of Color of Change, a brilliant lawyer, a civil rights activist, civil rights attorney, one of the most accomplished attorneys in America today. And I'm excited to have her on here to discuss Color of Change, the work they're doing to combat injustice, to promote racial justice, to combat anti-Black discrimination, which unfortunately is accelerating under this administration. But first, let me dive into this conversation with Kahlil Greene about Malcolm X. Again, if you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And here's my clip with him.
My dad, he's been in the comments. I've been seeing him just like posting different facts. He put the birthday from May 1925 to February 1965. I think my parents went to a event at the Shabazz Center yesterday.
Oh, nice.
And my dad always had a both portrait and then the autobiography of Malcolm X somewhere on a coffee table in our house. So
Amazing.
he's always been present. I'm in Boston right now, not too far from his house. I think in Roxbury neighborhood. So yeah, I mean that's obviously a legacy that we're all like living or being able to stand upon his shoulders in the work of those who worked with him. You mentioned the history of Black Muslims. I made a video with someone named Donnell Wright not too long ago, and he was telling the video was just about like Christian hegemony in Black history and how Black activism and the struggle to fight against white supremacy is often only framed as a struggle of like the Christian faith and Black people coming together, whether that's like organizing voting rights through churches or pastors and ministers like Martin Luther King Jr. and their sermons, which absolutely had an effect, like not to downplay any of that.
Yeah, of
but it
course.
often overshadows like the religious diversity of Black people. Even within Christianity, like it overlooks oftentimes Black Catholics over Black Protestants, overlooks Black Muslims over Black Christians, overlooks Black people of indigenous African religions over Abrahamic religions. So I think the more we can be expansive on these topics, like the more that we can celebrate the diversity in religion and also the racial diversity within it as well. So I think that's like really, really, really important. I'm going to share this specific story that I wrote about not too long ago at the end of Ramadan, of how, as you mentioned, around 30%, up to 30% of the enslaved population in the United States were Muslim before coming here.
Yeah.
And one of them was a man named Omar ibn Said, and I have the paragraph right here that I wrote on him. And Omar was a enslaved person. He was captured. He was from Senegal, so like what now is Senegal. And he was a scholar captured in 1807, and he was later on enslaved in North Carolina. And one of the threads that we'll see with Islam and Black activism is this thread of literacy. So Omar was able to read and write in Arabic, and he wrote a autobiography in Arabic and also wrote down passages of the Quran that he could memorize. He outwardly sort of like pretended to conform to Christianity and play it safe with his like capturers, but he always continued to practice Islam until the day that his like autobiography was released and he passed. So he's just one of many individual stories of people that adhere to Islam through their enslavement, before their enslavement, and afterwards. And I think that's something that's very powerful, just like the what this religion and religious identity did for them. And it's something that we see carried on through the Nation of Islam, through figures like Malcolm X, is that their oratory and their literacy skills and their scholarship and their writing is what really, really, I think, above all else, made them remarkable, as well as their just like sort of outwardness in terms of countering and going against white supremacy. I started one of my videos where I visited a church, one of the earliest churches in West Africa, or West and Central Africa is in Angola. And I started the video off with a Malcolm X quote that got a lot of people mad when Malcolm X called Christianity the white man's religion, which I'm not saying it is. Don't get me wrong. Like Black people have definitely used Christianity and come into it. But I think it just goes to show that he was also very outspoken and unapologetic in
Yeah.
not only his critiques of religion, but his critiques of white supremacy at large. And I think there's something that we can all take away from his life story.
Well, there's I want to double down on this point you made about Ibn Said, outwardly pretending to be Christian while being an Islamic scholar. I mean, that to me is kind of the epitome of what historian Reverend Edward Wilmot Blyden talks about when he writes about his studies and the history of Black Christians and Black Muslims. Now, this is a Christian minister talking about this, and he points out that the real contrast is that where you find Black Muslims versus Black Christians, Black Christians were denied the right to an education. They were denied the right to attain their own higher education. That's why HBCUs exist today, for example. They were forced to build their own church on the other side of the plantation. And even then, they were denied the right to read the scriptures for themselves, lest they read about the enslaved Jewish people escaping Egypt. And he goes, on the contrary, when you look at Black Muslim communities, you see generals and scholars and poets and architects and activists and people who are Hafiz Quran that have memorized the entire Quran. And it's this contrast, effectively, that he makes explicitly clear that this is one of the reasons why white supremacists were so adamant on denying enslaved Muslims the ability to speak in Arabic, forcing them to eat pork, forcing them to break up their families so that they wouldn't pass on that knowledge to the next generation. There's scholarship that indicates that many of the revolts of enslaved people were led by enslaved Muslims who recognized the importance of fighting for universal humanity. And we see the transformation of the American legislative system, because initially the argument was, well, these are heathens, and so therefore we have the right to enslave them in chattel slavery and subjugate them for as long as they shall live, because they're heathens, so that they're subhuman. But then when they were, forcibly converted to Christianity, many of them, then the question that was actually proposed in Georgia, in South Carolina, in North Carolina, in the state legislatures were, well, these were heathens before, but now they're Christians. And if they're our brothers in Christ, how can we enslave them? And do you know what the official rulings were? Like the South Carolina Supreme Court, the official ruling was that, yes, they were heathens before, and yes, they are our brothers in Christ now. But because we have given them eternal salvation, the least reparations they can pay us is to serve their white masters in this life, because we have given them the gift of eternal life in the next life. And so, to me, it's how white supremacy conforms and contorts itself. There's no religion behind white supremacy. It is just white supremacy. It's fascism.
Yeah.
And it's hijacked Christianity for these horrific and unjust causes. And again, someone like Malcolm, when he called Christianity the white man's religion, that's what I suspect he was referring to, that you took this, beautiful community, this certainly not a homogenous community of Africans from various tribes, various cultures, various religions. You stripped away everything from them, forced them to conform, and forced them your version of white supremacy on them and labeled it Christianity. And that can be a harsh truth for many to hear, but I think this is why Malcolm was so powerful in his day, and why his message today, 61 years after his assassination, still resonates as if it was a commentary on contemporary times.
Absolutely. And speaking to one of the points that you made historically, I want to just talk about the Malay Revolt. So this happened in 1835 in Salvador, and it was organized by enslaved Muslims who had planned out the entire revolt during Ramadan. So one might think that fasted is probably not the best physical time to carry out a revolt, but it was actually documented, or at least speculated by historians, that because of the fasting and because of the increased observances and religious community building that happened during Ramadan, it actually made it the more optimal time to
Wow.
actually organize a revolt, because it's the mental game that really matters when doing something like staging a revolt against white supremacy, against slavery, fighting for your family at all costs. Yeah, you could eat a lot and bulk up, but that's nowhere near as important as that sort of spiritual community building that you can have, that you need to do something as revolutionary as standing up to your enslavers. So the revolt happened once again in 1835, and I wouldn't say it's like successful in terms of like it ended slavery in Brazil per se, but it's of course successful in that it was one of many actions across all of the Americas that made slavery something that was more unstable and more ineffective to maintain, that led to abolition in each country time over time. And it's also reported in the Caribbean that enslavers recorded behaviors such as avoiding pork and fasting, that they would say were like either heathen things or whatever, but they didn't really understand were actually a part of the Islamic observance, because they thought that these people were absolutely unaware of religion, unaware of like the Abrahamic religions or the Bible in any way. But obviously, they had the Quran, they had access to these stories, and they knew what was going on.
Somebody asked in the comments if they're going to ask questions. I think by all means ask
Yeah,
questions.
feel free. We
Yeah.
can start reacting to questions a little bit more
Yeah,
now.
yeah, would love to take some of those. And you study kind of the history of this, and there's evidence that Bailey comes from Bilali, which is Bilal, who is one of the companions of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was an enslaved Abyssinian who the Prophet freed, and the story of his freedom is one that I always get emotional thinking about, because it is a story of resilience. And this was a man that, once the Muslims became victorious and reconquered Mecca peacefully, the two conditions that the Prophet set to the Meccans to avoid having to face capital punishment was, one, that they had to respect universal religious freedom. They didn't have to convert to Islam, but they had to let people worship or not worship as they wished. And the second condition that the Prophet set for these former enslavers, for these former fascists, to be forgiven for their crimes was they had to go to Bilal, who the Prophet handed a flag to and said, "You will find peace under the flag of Bilal." They had to go to the man that they tortured and ask him for his forgiveness and his blessing before they were allowed to stay. And to me, that speaks to two powerful things that have never happened in the United States. There's never been a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States. There have never been reparations paid in the United States. So in this way, Bilal was paid his reparations because those who were his abusers then became, subservient to him, and had to ask him for his support and had to make him whole on a monetary level. But then, just as importantly, those who were the supremacists and the racists had to humble themselves. They were forced to humble themselves, or essentially die. I mean, that's the reality of it. That the condition was not that you had to convert to a different religion. The condition was that you had to humble your supremacy, your racial supremacy, and your arrogance, and recognize the equality of humanity. That was a condition. And I mean, from a historical perspective, I don't know if there's ever been a situation like that ever that's occurred. But that's one reason why you have scholars like Ina Curran Brown and Gwendolyn Midlow Hall and Edward Willard Blyden, who I mentioned, who spoke extensively about how across Africa, across Asia, you had this multiracial coalition of Muslims who worked together. That's not to say that there's not racism among Muslims. Trust me, there absolutely is. Mm-hmm. But from a historical general perspective, the consensus that was set was that here we are not going to have a racial hierarchy. We are actually going to find ways to collaborate and work together. And that's why you saw this massive growth of the Muslim empire across Arabs and Persians and Africans. Within the first 100 years, it became the largest empire in history. It spread all the way to Indonesia, which to this day, by the way, is the largest Muslim majority country in the world. And it wasn't spread by force or by the sword or by any kind of violence. It was spread by trade and by the sheer treatment of the basic humanity in one another. And I think that in the world we live in right now, that's kind of my measuring stick for any person. I really don't care what a person's faith is or is not. It's actually irrelevant to me in the sense that I'm not going to be asked about it. It doesn't matter to me. What I want to know is, how does that faith contribute to how you treat other people? All right, we're going to come back to that conversation in just a minute, but we're going to go to break right now. And when we come back from break, we are going to have Portia Allen Kyle, who is the interim executive director, the executive director at Color of Change, nation's largest racial justice organization. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'm extraordinarily excited for our guest this week. Portia Allen Kyle leads Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization. If you followed Portia's work, you know she is a brilliant attorney, has led massive organizations in the nonprofit, the government, in the academic space, worked in the Biden administration. And right now, she is the tip of the spear in protecting Medicaid, led a rally on the Capitol steps, has worked closely with one of my favorite Congress people, Congressman Ayanna Pressley. Portia, especially in these trying times, it's comforting to have your voice leading the charge, and thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
You know, I first became aware of you many years ago. I can't pinpoint when, but I think you've just been in the space for so long. And as an attorney myself, I always look for other attorneys to look up to and see the work that they're doing. You've had some pretty amazing wins. I love, seeing you get recognized as the top 40 attorney by the American Bar Association's Young Lawyers Division a couple of years ago. One question I love to ask people who lead by example, and you're clearly at the top of that list, is what's your superhero origin story? What made you decide, you know what, the status quo is not mathing. We need to change what's happening right now.
Ooh, it's probably hard to pinpoint just one thing, but my mom was always a very, when I was younger, she just always seemed to know and know what she stood for and what was
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And so she would bring us to protests. She would, constantly. I mean, it was the hours of WBAI in the car. It was, the Amy Goodman, all of the things as I was growing up. Um, and I remember when Amadou Diallo was murdered and, going to protests, going to the vestibule and to vigils like in Sound View, after and in the weeks and months after. And that's probably why and where I began to care deeply about policing. That was, before having my own experiences with, police, just as a child, before watching, friends and family and, seeing what people have gone through, and how they navigate the world and how the world treats them and how the law treats them in particular is probably what helped fine tune that over time of this isn't right. This is, fundamentally messed up. And I at least feel like I should do my part to try to make the world a little bit better.
one of the things that I always think about in my own growth and development in this space, I mean, I'm an immigrant to this country. I was 4 years old. I always say I was fortunate that when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, my mentors at my mosque were Black civil rights leaders, folks who were on the jazz scene in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and they were the elders at the mosque. And so for me, that was normal to learn from them. And well, one thing that I think really shook me was when I went to law school and I read Dr. Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. I think we have a tendency in this country to think that, well, racism and white supremacy is due to ignorance. And she disabuses you of that notion. She points out that no, it's actually not ignorance, because these systems of white supremacy that we're seeing today, the mass incarceration, the war on drugs, the defunding of Black and brown schools, they're actually extraordinarily sophisticated and they're extremely deliberate. And so if all you're doing is worrying about education, which is one important element of it, but not dismantling the structures that are there, you get to a situation like right now where you've got the president banning Harvard from accepting foreign students, which is like 6,500 students. You've got the Supreme Court repealing affirmative action, even though it's helped white women more than any other demographic combined, every other demographic combined. All that premise to say color change defines its work as leading campaigns that build real power for Black communities. In the backdrop of what we're seeing, this all out assault on racial justice, what does that look like right now? What's the vision of color of change in this world that we're in right now?
I mean, this moment is, I think, unprecedented in a number of ways. And I think the most helpful thing in the way, that we've been talking about it in conversations with our members and supporters and other folks is, we are in the midst of an attack on all of the progress and infrastructure and legacies of civil rights. And it is, this led by a neo-segregationist administration and enablers and supporters. And so that is both within government and the corporations, the oligarchs, um, the even the general public that has, supported this decline into fascism and, supported this decline and dismantling of our civil rights infrastructure that is not just aimed to send us back to Jim Crow, but really designed to send us back to a time that is probably more accurately, post-Plessy
Yeah.
in our time in history. And at Color of Change, we've always known that our work is for the long game. It's, why it's been important to make sure that we are, bringing in and building with our members in this moment, that we, regardless of what's going on in the nation right now, that we are organizing in joy, that we are remembering that there are still things, to be celebrated. And even from a historical perspective, some of the most beautiful and lasting works of art came from really dark periods in American history, right? Like the Harlem Renaissance was on the backdrop of, lynchings and the rise of Jim Crow and the resurgence of the KKK across the country. And some of them, and so I don't, we've always been a resilient people, and I do not discount the ability to find beauty and triumph out of darkness and tragedy. And so I am confident and take comfort in that. I also, I think, take a little bit of comfort in, maybe comfort is the wrong word, but I'm encouraged about the opportunity that we have here to grow and cultivate and nurture the next generation of, whether it's attorneys or just advocates, organizers, et cetera, who are going to be really politicized in this moment and who are going to develop their lifelong politic of what is right and what is just and what we all deserve through this moment, and carry that fight forward for the next 50, 60 years, hopefully longer, as a standard and a torch for Black people deserve nice things, like communities of color deserve nice things, and we will have them even if those in power today don't want us to.
Amen. I mean, beautifully said. And you look at the moments in history, Robert Smalls could not have existed without these, the horrors of slavery, igniting his passion and fire to conceive this brilliant plan to steal a Confederate vessel, go to Union waters, convince President Lincoln to let Black people fight in the Civil War and help turn the tide of the Civil War. I mean, it's a horrific situation he came out of, but to your point, it was out of that horrific situation that we got this gem of a person who literally changed the course of world history almost single-handedly. Claudette Colvin, Irene Morgan, preceding Rosa Parks, all three women. Rosa Parks gets the most credit, but people don't remember that Claudette Colvin and Irene Morgan laid the groundwork for Rosa Parks as well.
Yep.
And as we kind of see, you're alluding to this point that tough times create strong people and strong people create good times. And we're kind of in that downswing right now of tough times. I feel like on some levels, you're exactly right. On many levels, you're exactly right that we are in unprecedented times. On other levels, it feels like it's kind of precedented because you just pointed out that we're going to this post-Plessy world, especially with our Supreme Court. I mean, when you look at our Supreme Court history, the vast majority, and people always get upset when I say this, but it's true, the vast majority of members of our Supreme Court were white supremacists throughout American history. The fact that there's non-white supremacists is kind of a modern day post-Jim Crow. You could even call it an innovation. I remember when Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was being nominated and people were questioning her merit. She was more qualified than any person in the history of the Supreme Court, like objectively, factually, quantitatively speaking. As a matter of fact, a significant number, I can't remember the exact number, I had the data in front of me, but something like 100 members of the Supreme Court never even went to law school or were lawyers at all. They were just some random dude that somebody in power was like, hey, you come here and sit on the Supreme Court. And these are the people running our country. So what's your message to young people, especially young Black people, young brown people, immigrants from marginalized communities, to young white allies of the work that needs to be done at this point going forward to transform these hard times to the good times that we're envisioning over the next 40, 50, 60 years and hopefully longer?
Yeah, I mean, hard times of these also, I think, seed good movements, right?
Yes.
And what we need is a movement. And so for folks who are figuring out what to do, anything is worth doing in this moment. Like sometimes, and this may be a little bit of an aside, but I'll share, it's often the case when we do petitions as one tactic as a part of our campaigns. And oftentimes we'll hear people say, signing a petition doesn't matter. Petitions don't change anything. Well, signing the petition is, not the thing that will necessarily like pass the law, right? But signing the signing the petition begins to show our opposition how much power and who is behind us. And
Yes.
so even those little steps of signaling, we have people with us, allows those of us who are, in space and pushing and taking it to, decision makers to say, it's not just us coming out of nowhere, right? Like there is a groundswell of support for what we are asking for and what we are demanding. And so, if all you can do, for example, is sign a petition, sign that petition. If all you can do is show up at a protest, show up at a protest. If you, have the means to wrap your arms around an organization, and it would be great if it were color of change, but like if it's your local food bank, because all of the funding programs, that provide food, to food banks are being cut at the moment, wrap your arms around that food bank, right? And like, protect your local, nonprofits, your local organizations that are really showing up and serving community. And that the combination of mutual aid, of deep organizing, of being in relationship, of advocacy, of, pushing to rein back corporate power and corporate overreach, all of those things are what we need in this moment to carry us through. And I would just tell folks, whatever your lane might be, just find that lane, and it's okay to stay in it.
I love that. I love that. If you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Portia Allen Kyle, Executive Director of Color of Change, one of the nation's leading racial justice and civil rights organizations. And I love this answer because I think often we think that unless I'm Dr. King leading the Montgomery bus boycott, I'm not making a difference. And that to me is like, saying that I can't be a runner unless I'm Michael Johnson, or I can't be a basketball player unless I'm Michael Jordan, right? It's like you can.
Right.
And guess what? Going for a jog yourself, even if you're not running world record speeds, it's still good for your health. It's still good for your body, right? If you're, it's so that to me, I think is an important message, especially for people to hear from leaders such as yourselves who have been and are in the trenches. That whatever your lane is, I love that. Lean into it, and then just be consistent with it. I think this is the other
Yeah.
part that we often forget. Republicans, folks on the right, spent half a century trying to repeal Roe v. Wade, and it worked, right? And they were successful in it. It took them a half century, but it was that consistency of a half century to destroy reproductive health access that got them their success. And my point has always been, if people can scheme for destructive things for a half century to be successful, then we can plan and organize for positive things and do it
Absolutely.
hopefully much faster. You were on the
Hmm.
Capitol steps recently with this, absurd backwards billionaire handout that the Trump regime is pushing forward. I'm not sure people understand how devastating this piece of legislation is going to be. And you were there specifically about Medicaid. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and talk a little bit about, well, it's a three-part question. Just your experience of being on the Capitol at probably all hours of the night. Two, what impact this legislation is going to have on ordinary folks if it becomes law. And three, what we need to be doing right now and how people can get involved with Color of Change right now to prevent this piece of legislation from becoming law.
Absolutely. I mean, Color of Change hosted a lobby day alongside our partners the other day. And so we took to the Hill with our members, meeting with legislators, um, meeting with their staff, and really pushing and telling in very plain human terms. This bill will make people poorer, sicker, right?
Yeah.
It will undermine the ability for so many families to just survive. And when we think about things like Medicaid, perhaps we're thinking seniors, perhaps we're thinking you know, our minds sometimes, and certainly, you know, the minds of House Republicans have just decided a number of people don't deserve to live. I mean, you know, Medicaid supports core, key and critical services for, you know, folks who need oxygen on a daily basis, who, without being able to pay for their oxygen tanks, will die. It, you know, provides services, you know, for folks. I was a young mom. And when I was a young mom, my daughter broke her arm. It was because of our state health insurance program, paid for through Medicaid funds, that she was able to get care, able to, you know, get the services that she needed, at a point in time that I was, yeah, you know, 20 years old, trying to navigate the world, in
Right.
a, you know, 20 something years old, trying to navigate the world. And so it's, you know, these types of just basic services and health services for children, for, you know, the elderly. It is food programs that ensure that kids at school don't go hungry while they're trying to learn, because we know that no one can learn when they're hungry. We've all
Yeah.
tried
We've
to
all been
sit and pay
hangry before.
attention to
Yeah.
something and had our stomach growl and become extremely distracted, right? Imagine that on a daily basis during your most formative years.
Right.
You know, this bill will uh, decrease opportunities for higher education for folks who need it the most. It is coming for Pell Grants. It is coming for, you know, federal financial aid. Like, all that will be left are, you know, unsubsidized loans for many folks, with this bill going through. And
And the worst
education
part
has
of
been
all of
kind
it
of,
is that it's all to cut taxes for billionaires. Like I
it,
can't, I can't think of a
yeah.
noble reason
And
to do
it's
all
not
this.
just to cut taxes for billionaires, it's to create a class of trillionaires, as if those who are dissatisfied with their billions will suddenly become much happier when they have trillions.
Wild to
Like,
me.
it's it is insane what
Right.
we are willing to sacrifice on a human level to give handouts to Musk and, you know, Trump and their billionaire buddies.
There's been so many studies done on this that um, a lot of this backlash to these programs that provide basic necessities, you know, promote the general welfare, as our founding documents call, that white people in America don't actually mind these programs. They just mind that Black and brown people get access to them as well. Professor Jonathan Metzler talks about this in Dying of Whiteness, where one of the famous stories he tells is he talks to a person dying of cancer, some kind of kidney cancer or liver cancer in
Yeah.
Kentucky. And he says, well, don't you want your state to expand Medicaid so you can get healthcare access? And he basically says, well, yeah, but then, you know, as Black and brown people get access too, and we're basically a communist society at that point, so I'd rather just die. I mean, so these folks see themselves as martyrs, which is just mind-boggling to me. And you think about why we built a middle class post World War II. And it wasn't by accident. It was because we had a tax rate, a marginal tax rate above 90% for the super wealthy that forced them to spend their money on actual people as opposed to hoard it. And it allowed folks to build up generational wealth. Now, when I say it allowed folks to build up generational wealth, I mean primarily white people, because Black people had to suffer redlining. Asians like myself weren't allowed to immigrate here at all. Black and Latino people weren't able to get the subsidized mortgages. Of course, the GI Bill was only for white people, so it was largely only for white people. But we saw the generational wealth that it built, and when you study wealth and income inequality, that was the lowest disparity in our nation's history in the post-World War II era, despite the vehement anti-Black discrimination. So could just imagine how much stronger our economy could be if we enacted those same policies, but were inclusive of non-white people. And I think it's that fear that is causing, that is maybe not causing, but enabling the powers that be, the Trumps and Musks of the world, the Peter Thiels of the world, to say, no, absolutely not. We're not going to allow this to happen. And if it ends up killing some poor white people, they're okay with it. They're perfectly fine with that. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Like, what kind of a psychosis causes someone to say, I'm just going to kill people, but it's okay because it makes me wealthy? Like, how does that function? Like, what broke in someone's life that that's okay?
You know, not able to comment deeply on the psychosis, but the
Yeah.
politic of resentment
Yeah.
that
Oh,
has
yeah.
dominated so much of our so much of our nation's approach to, who deserves basic things,
Yes.
and then who deserves nicer things, right? And so
Yes.
to your point, like, we saw with the Affordable Care Act, like, white people liked the option to buy into healthcare as well. They just didn't like it being called Obamacare, right?
Yeah.
Like they
Wow.
wanted, Affordable Care Act, like, no, don't take that away. But like
Yeah.
Obamacare, right? Oh gosh, terrible.
Yeah.
Despite it being the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And so like you see this, this idea, and you see it with, I mean, every day, every week, it seems like there are, a number of Trump voters that are taking to um the airwaves and interviews and like op-eds. There was a video of, a number of farmers in Nebraska
Yeah.
the other day that were, complaining about how they can't find workers for their farms, and, within a couple of months will probably be bankrupt,
Yeah.
and unable to, maintain their farms and their lands because of some of the immigration policies.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And what's
and
crazy is you go back and you watch the debates between Ronald Reagan and George Bush, and they're arguing with each other on who can be more compassionate for immigrants. Now, I'm no fan of Bush or Reagan, don't get me wrong. On this issue, if that debate were to happen today, they would be called left wing, liberals, woke, CRT,
absolutely.
every siphoned off pejorative they can think of. And all they were saying is, hey, there's a lot of economic benefit if rather than demonizing immigrants, we have a work visa program. It'll benefit our farmers, it'll benefit them. Ronald Reagan calls for open borders. He literally calls for open borders in his debate with George Bush to say, I want open borders so they can come and go as they please and it'll benefit us. How we've gotten here is mind-boggling. By the way, if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Portia Allen Kyle, Executive Director at Color of Change. And in our last couple of minutes, Portia, I really would love to lean into the work you're doing at Color of Change, particularly in these times as we're trying to stop bad legislation, stop the attacks on universities, stop the anti-Black legislation that's coming through, and there's plenty of it. Um, the number one question I get from folks, and you alluded to this a bit earlier, but I'd love for you to do a deeper dive, is how do I get involved? How do I get started? I'm not an executive director of a major organization. I'm not a lawyer, certainly not a lawyer who's award winning. How do I get involved? How do I get started? So what should they do to get involved with Color of Change and start to play a role in protecting our democracy, our communities?
Absolutely. We are welcoming and looking forward, to being in community with more and more folks across the country. And so colorofchange.org is where you can find us. You can also find us on the platforms that we hold accountable. So X, Facebook, Instagram as well, LinkedIn as well.
In this house, we
Um,
still call it Twitter. I'm just going to throw it out there, but go ahead.
I I so deliberately try to say X and not Twitter, because at this point I feel like it might age me, which is like via
Fair.
tell. But please find us Color of Change on the platforms we hold accountable, or you could text join to 55156.
Hmm.
But we are holding members, what we call holding member calls, what we call our squad calls. We are doing regular trainings. So, recently we've been doing a series of storytelling trainings that are all about, as folks are, Black people don't experience bills and issues, right? Like and just like we experience life. And so, providing folks with the tools to tell their stories, to their lawmakers, their legislators, tell their stories in the press, through op-eds or, blogs or other things, just to get those out there and so that people understand that it is real people being impacted by all of these things. And, our work, in addition to pushing very hard against these tax cuts, have also been doing a lot of work on the corporate accountability and overreach, and particularly on tech. In this moment, we are in a moment where, tech companies and those who lead tech companies are really looking for a free-for-all in the cuts on regulation that is going to be bad for, it's already bad for Black people, but it will be even worse. You have OpenAI that is, doing retina scans across the country, in exchange for $10 or less. You have, 23andMe just sold, millions upon millions of people's genetic information because they went bankrupt. And these, ancestry testing companies disproportionately would target Black people to find their ancestry because slavery, right?
Exactly.
And so, and now our genetic information is out there, and we've seen this before, right? Like, Henrietta Lacks.
The movie, right? Yeah, exactly.
And so we've been doing a lot of work.
I never felt comfortable doing the 23andMe stuff because I was afraid of this exact thing, that they were going to just sell it out to the highest bidder. And it's unfortunate. But that's why I'm so inspired by the work Color of Change is doing under your leadership, to continue to push back against these really bad policies that are going to hurt all Americans, obviously Black people in particular, because of this specific anti-Black targeting. But I love the fact that the work you're doing, while you're elevating Black Americans, it ultimately elevates all Americans at the end of the day. And that's a beautiful and powerful thing. Colorofchange.org is your website. And if folks want to connect with you, is the best way to go through the Color of Change website?
Colorofchange.org. I am also It's Miss Portia on platforms. If I could say that again without stumbling through it, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Folks can find me on X, on Instagram, It's Miss Portia, on LinkedIn, Portia Allen Kyle.
Wonderful. Well, Portia, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. The work you're doing is the Lord's work. It's so critical. It's so necessary. And I encourage everyone listening to this to go to colorofchange.org, sign up as a volunteer, get involved. And if you have a few extra bucks, make a tax-deductible contribution. Because if I'm not mistaken, Color of Change is a 501c3, correct?
Yes, we are C3, C4, and PAC.
I love it. I love it. So if you have all the money, send it their way, because this is how we build movements, by investing in the kinds of futures that we want to see. Portia Allen Kyle, Executive Director of Color of Change, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Portia Allen Kyle, Executive Director at Color of Change. Make sure you check them out at colorofchange.org and support their work. These are the kinds of organizations who are the tip of the spear in combating the immense injustice we're seeing. And support them, follow them, subscribe to them. If you can't contribute, donate to them. As you close out the show, I'm going to bring back the conversation with Kahlil Greene and Al-Hajj Malcolm X. And, again, think about the conversation we had about progress and what that means today. This is one of the key themes we talk about, and here's that clip. I guess, and we've been going on for a little bit, so I guess start wrapping up. I guess, what do you hope to see in the coming years? I mean, where do you see things going? Because I will say this, I cringe a little bit when people say we're in unprecedented times, because it tells me you haven't actually studied history. We're unfortunately in very precedented times, where you've got a president who's a white supremacist and a complicit Congress who is actively passing white supremacist policies. You've got a Supreme Court that's a hyper right-wing Supreme Court. People forget, only for about 12 years during the Civil Rights Acts did we actually have a left-leaning court. Throughout much of American history, the majority of the Supreme Court has been hyper right-wing, hyper, white supremacy. Justice Taney's bust, who ruled on Dred Scott and said Black people aren't citizens because they're subhuman. It stood in the halls of Congress till 2017 or something. So there's not a shortage of examples throughout American history that we can look to that says this is not the first time we've been here. Unfortunately, because we've never had a truth and reconciliation, because we've never truly had meaningful reparations, restitution, meaningful acknowledgement of the genocide and the slavery upon which this country was built, it's going to perpetuate. I guess you can call them wins, but the situations where a plantation burns down can't be the win. That can't be the, well, now we're even. No, that's not how it works, right? That's a thing, but it's definitely nothing substantive or meaningful for the grand scheme of meaningful racial and economic justice. Professor Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about this extensively, that even if you are anti-reparations for enslavement, what about reparations for Jim Crow and redlining? I mean, there's just so much. So what do you see? I mean, you're what, 25 right now? What do you see when you're going to be my age, when you're in your 40s in 15 and 20 years? Where do you want the country to go, and how do you want folks to support the work you're doing to help us get there?
I don't know. I think I will say I will maybe like a counter perspective just a little bit. I think the thing that makes me a little bit pessimistic in terms of like why I do feel like it's somewhat unprecedented now is that like white supremacy has always been in America. People have always been racist. I will say it doesn't for most of that time, like I do believe some people knew it was wrong for sure. Like you just know, like whatever religious text, like you know you're not supposed to treat people that way. But I do think that like they didn't have the education for it. Like they didn't necessarily like have like the scientific studies, the historical understanding, of like people on TikTok telling you like how race developed and why it's wrong and all of that. I feel like in 2020, though it did not reach everyone, a generally large swath of the population had some form of like racial justice education put onto them, whether by choice or not, right? Whether it was a DEI program at work, or like they came across a TikTok or a news report showing like the high cases of police violence, the history of slavery, and how it led to mass incarceration. And I think that was like in my mind like one of the sort of like the goalposts, right? Like we want to just get everyone like once everyone realizes like what race is, why racism is bad, like we're gonna be okay, like the history of it, the nitty gritty, like they see something shocking, and I think to have that happen and then have such intense backlash, like I think that's what scares me, right? Like the fact that people, by and large, know, like mostly people know Christopher Columbus was not a good guy. Like, yeah, you grew up hearing that you played it in Cowboys and Indians, whatever. But like, come 2020, there were enough think pieces about it on like every news source, BuzzFeed, whatever, for you to know that's wrong. And then to have like these white supremacist, far right conservatives, or like the woman who called the black child the N word, to have all this happen, I think with that knowledge, like knowing for sure that these people know it's wrong and like know the history, like not just in an emotional capacity know it's wrong, but like know intellectually why it's wrong, and for them to still do it is quite jarring. And I think that that's probably like once again, it probably happened before in history, like the backlash of the civil rights movement, but like to see it happen in such a scale right now feels pretty jarring for me. I will say by the time I am at your age, I would hope that there's enough of a sort of like simmering down of like the far right fascism, that people can just intellectually realize that there are very strong cases for things like reparations and anti-racism and everything that's been demonized as like woke and like radical ideology. I think I just hope that those become normalized as a sort of like bare minimum that yes, reparations are a thing. Jewish people got reparations from the United States and Germany after the Holocaust. Native American tribes got reparations when treaties were broken. Not all of them, of course, and they deserve a lot more. Two, Japanese got like. There's so many instances that where this happened, that it feels weird to like cut off at Black people. So like that's one argument that I think is should be widely acknowledged.
Yeah.
Also, when you count reparations for Jim Crow as well, and then also just like the it feels like it's crazy we have to go back to this, but like that everyone is equal, right? Like that there's so many even newsletters on Substack and Twitter accounts that are just dedicated to like the supremacy of the Western civilization and like talking about how the Near East and like Islamic cultures are just barbaric and crazy and like how Africans are savages and whatever, so on and so forth. Like that's becoming trendy and popular and very mainstream again. Though it's always bubbling there. And I just feel like I just want that to be demonized again and for like people to love diversity, like sort of like the '90s kids shows, like Sesame Street. Like everyone's like, there's like a Chinese kid, and like a black kid, and a white kid, whatever. Like I feel like we have to go back to that because I thought that we like there were still issues then, but it feels like comparatively that was a good place. At least we could have a black character without that black actor being attacked on the internet ruthlessly to no end.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, well said. We should have another conversation about it because I think Dr. Michelle Alexander talks about this as well in her book, The New Jim Crow, where she just points out that the knowledge is actually not enough. Because
Yeah.
I think you're right that people I think have more knowledge, but she would point out that knowledge is not enough, and people, in her estimation, mistake racism for ignorance, when she points out that these modern systems of mass incarceration, for example, or the war on drugs, or you know, the disparity in police violence in black versus white neighborhoods, that it's not due to ignorance, it's due to becoming more sophisticated. And you know, extremely. You know, I was talking to somebody who, a wealthy white guy in his 50s, who was running for office, and he couldn't understand that redlining was a real thing. He didn't believe it. And this is a person who's college graduate, worth millions of dollars, running for office, and thought I was lying to him about redlining. Thought I was lying to him about the GI Bill being only for white soldiers. Not, and then just the impact of that. He was like, "Well, I don't understand why these black schools are so downtrodden. Why can't they just use the property taxes?" I'm like, what? Like, what planet are you on? So I see your point. I think you're exactly right that people have gotten the education. I think where I would go one step further is that I just don't think that's enough.
Yeah, I think I'm coming to realize that now. I wish I was at your wisdom or had read Michelle Alexander's book before.
No, it's a good read. I think you'll enjoy it because I think it validates the point you're making that the people are aware, and I think it just speaks to the additional work that needs to be done. We will leave it there. You can subscribe to my Substack and listen to that full conversation as well. Just my website, www.qasimrashid.com. All my content is free, so you can subscribe for free. If you want to throw us a cup of coffee a month, love you for that as well. But none of our content is behind a paywall because I don't believe in paywalls. My friends, thank you as always for tuning in. Be sure to follow me on social media across all platforms at Qasim Rashid. We'll continue on my end to advance a show that builds on compassion, justice, and accountability for those in power. Got a great show lined up for next week. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place at 10 a.m. Eastern on Sunday on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126. My friends, be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.